Have you ever heard something so cruel that your brain just stops? Like it physically refuses to process what it just heard? That happened to me on what should have been the best night of my life. I was 32 years old, standing in a restaurant I'd booked 3 weeks in advance, wearing the only blazer I owned that didn't have a coffee stain on the sleeve, surrounded by the people I loved most. My best friend Lena had driven 4 hours from Cincinnati. My co-worker Adam had rearranged his whole weekend. My boyfriend Theo had made a reservation at this place 6 times before I finally let him, because I kept saying the occasion wasn't big enough. The occasion was this: after 7 years of nights and weekends and lunches eaten at my desk, I had just made senior project manager at one of the largest construction firms in Ohio, the youngest person in company history to hold that title. I wasn't saying that to brag. I was saying it because I needed you to understand what it cost me to get there. And then my mother opened her mouth. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this really started. My name is Serena. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the oldest of 2 kids. My brother Caleb is 4 years younger than me, and from the time he was old enough to walk, he was the center of our household's universe. Not in the way parents love a baby. I understood that. I mean in the way that by the time I was 12, I had already learned that my job in that house was to be invisible and capable. Caleb's job was to be loved. My mother would tell you that isn't true. She would tell you she loved us equally, that she was just harder on me because I was older, because I could handle it. What she wouldn't tell you is that when Caleb failed 9th grade English, she drove to the school and argued with his teacher for 45 minutes. When I failed 10th grade pre-calculus, the only class I ever failed in my entire academic life, she told me I needed to figure it out. I figured it out. I always figured it out. By senior year of high school, I had a part-time job at a grocery store 20 hours a week. I used that money to pay for my SAT prep course, my college application fees, the dress for junior prom because my mother forgot to set aside money and I didn't want to make it into a fight. I wasn't resentful about it then. I was just practical. That's what I told myself. I got into Ohio State on a partial scholarship. My parents helped with what the scholarship didn't cover for exactly 1 year. After that, my mother sat me down and explained that they were putting Caleb in a private high school. A decision I hadn't been consulted on, and that the tuition was significant, and that they trusted me to handle things on my own because I always did. She said it like it was a compliment. So I handled things. I took out loans. I picked up extra shifts. I graduated in 4.5 years instead of 4, because I had to drop to part-time enrollment 1 semester when my grocery store hours got cut, and I needed a second job. I didn't tell my parents about that semester. There was no point. After graduation, I moved to Columbus, started at the firm as a project coordinator assistant, basically the bottom rung, and worked my way up. I sent money home when I could, not because anyone asked me to at first, but because it felt like the right thing to do. My dad had a bad back that kept him from working overtime. My mother's hours at the dental office where she worked the front desk had been reduced, and Caleb was now in his 2nd year at a private university in Kentucky that cost more per semester than I made in 3 months. And here is the part that still makes me shake my head when I think about it. Nobody ever said thank you. Not once. It was just absorbed, expected, like water finding its level. When Caleb dropped out after his junior year to figure himself out, my parents didn't seem particularly upset. He moved back home. My mother started mentioning, in that gentle, pointed way she had, that it would be nice if I could increase my monthly contribution since they were covering his expenses again. I was 28. I had $4,000 in savings and $31,000 in student loan debt. I did not increase my contribution. That was the first time I said no to something. My mother didn't speak to me for 3 weeks. When she came back around, she acted as if it hadn't happened. We slipped back into the pattern. I came home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I called every Sunday. I listened to updates about Caleb, his new hobby, his new idea for a business, his new girlfriend. I offered my own updates when asked, which wasn't often. When I got my first real promotion, project manager, not senior yet, I called home excited. My mother said, "That's great, honey. Oh, Caleb is thinking about going back to school, did I tell you?" She had not told me. And just like that, my news was a bridge to his. I started to understand, somewhere around that time, that my achievements were not interesting to my parents. They were background noise, evidence that I was fine, which meant they didn't have to think about me, which meant they could direct their attention where they felt it was more needed. I want to be careful here because I don't want to paint my parents as monsters. They weren't cruel people, they were just limited in the amount of emotional attention they could distribute, and they had decided, maybe without even realizing it, that I required less of it. That I was the self-sufficient one, the one who didn't need. The problem is, I did need. I just got very good at not showing it. The night of my promotion dinner, I had told my parents about it 2 weeks in advance. I gave them the date, the address of the restaurant, the time, 7 o'clock. My mother said she was proud of me. My dad said he'd be there. I reminded them once the week before, just to be sure. They showed up at 8:45. The appetizers were long gone. Lena and Adam and Theo and I had already eaten our entrees. We had been laughing and talking, and I had been trying not to check my phone too many times. Telling myself traffic, telling myself something came up, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. When they walked in, my mother was still wearing her coat. She looked around the restaurant with an expression I recognized, that faint distaste she got in places that didn't match her idea of what a special occasion should look like. This was a nice place. Not white tablecloth nice, but absolutely nice. Theo had picked it because he knew I liked the wood-fired salmon. My dad said, "Sorry we're late, we had to drop Caleb off." I said, "Drop him off where?" "His buddy's place in Westerville, he had a thing." I nodded. I looked at my mother. She was taking off her coat and handing it to the back of her chair like we had all the time in the world. Lena caught my eye across the table. She had known me for 20 years. She knew exactly what was happening inside me. The next 40 minutes were fine, surface level fine. My parents ordered food, my dad made a few jokes, my mother asked Theo about his job and listened for about 90 seconds before steering the conversation back to Caleb and whether I had heard that he was thinking about getting his real estate license. I said I had not heard that. She said he had a real gift for talking to people. I cut my salmon into smaller and smaller pieces. At some point, I think it was when the dessert menus came out, my dad said, "You know, Serena, your mother and I were talking. We think you should really consider whether Caleb could shadow you for a while at your firm, get a feel for the industry." I put down my fork. "He's got good instincts," my mother added. "And you're in a position now where you could really help him." Theo went very still next to me. He knew what that look on my face meant. I said, "This dinner is for my promotion." My mother said, "Of course it is, we know that. You're an hour and 45 minutes late because you drove Caleb to a friend's house." My dad shifted in his seat. "We said we were sorry about that, and the first thing you brought up when you sat down was Caleb's clans, and now you want to use my promotion as a networking opportunity for him." The table was quiet. Lena was looking at the dessert menu with the focused attention of someone who is absolutely listening to every word. My mother said, in that quiet voice she used when she felt she was being mischaracterized, "We just want what's best for both of you. You've always been the strong one, Serena. We've never had to worry about you." And my dad, and I want to be precise here because I have replayed this moment probably 400 times. My dad looked at me across the table and he said, "Honestly, your mother and I were talking the other night. We think if we'd put half the energy into Caleb's future that we put into yours, he wouldn't be struggling like this. We shortchanged him. You always landed on your feet." I heard Lena set down her menu. I heard Theo inhale. I heard the ambient sound of the restaurant, forks, voices, the low music they were playing that I'd barely noticed until that moment. And I thought, there it is. After 32 years, there it is. Because here's what that sentence meant. Translated, the investment they had made in me, which had been, to be accurate, 1 year of college tuition and a roof over my head until I was 18, was something they now regretted. Not because it hadn't worked out, but because it had, and they needed someone to blame for the fact that Caleb hadn't. I was the explanation for his failures. I looked at my dad for a long moment. Then I looked at my mother. She was studying her water glass. I said, I want to make sure I understand what you just said. You think the reason Caleb is struggling is because you invested in me? My dad started to backtrack immediately. That's not exactly I meant we spread ourselves thin trying to. No, I said. You said what you said. My mother looked up. Serena, your father didn't mean I paid my own SAT prep. I paid my own prom dress. I paid my own application fees. I took out loans you never once offered to help with. I've been sending money home since I was 24 years old. And you sat here an hour and 45 minutes late to my dinner because you were running Caleb to a friend's house. I paused. What exactly did you invest in me? Because I want to understand what you think you sacrificed. My dad's jaw was tight. My mother's eyes were shining, not with tears, exactly, but with the look she got when she felt a situation was getting away from her. She said, we gave you everything we had. I said, then I feel sorry for you, because I gave you more than that, and it apparently didn't register. I reached into my purse. I took out $200 in cash, my half of the dinner, which Theo had already quietly told me he was covering, but I needed to do this, and I put it on the table. Then I stood up. My mother said, Serena, don't do this here. I said, I'm not doing anything. I'm leaving my own party. I looked at Lena and Adam. Thank you both for being here. It meant everything. I looked at Theo. He was already folding his napkin. My dad said, you're being dramatic. I picked up my blazer from the back of my chair. I looked at him one more time. I said, I hope Caleb gets his real estate license. I genuinely do. But I'm done being the explanation for why he hasn't. And I walked out. Theo caught up with me at the valet stand. He didn't say anything, just took my hand. We stood there in the November cold waiting for his car, and I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just felt empty. The way you feel after carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally setting it down. Not relief exactly. More like the absence of a weight you'd forgotten you were holding. We drove home in near silence. At some point, Theo said, I'm proud of you. I said, for what? He said, for not apologizing. I hadn't even noticed that I hadn't apologized. But he was right. For the first time in my adult life, I had said something true in front of my parents and then walked away without immediately trying to smooth it over. That night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and did the math. Not the emotional math, the actual math. I pulled up my banking app and went back 3 years. The money I had sent home, the amount I had contributed to Caleb's expenses when my mother asked and I said yes. It was more than my student loan balance, not by a little. I closed the app. I didn't feel angry, exactly. I felt clear. The next morning I sent my parents a text, not a long one. I said, I need some time and space. Please don't reach out until I do. I mean that kindly and I mean it firmly. My mother called 4 times that day. I let it go to voicemail. My dad texted once. We didn't mean to upset you. Call when you're ready. I didn't call. 3 weeks passed. Then 6. Christmas came and went. Lena called me on Christmas morning and we talked for 2 hours. Theo's family had me over for dinner and his mum quietly piled food on my plate like she'd been doing it for years, even though she'd only met me 4 times. I cried in the car on the way home, which surprised me. I think I was just full for the first time in a long time. full of something that was actually mine. In January, I stopped the automatic monthly transfers to my parents' account. I had set them up 2 years ago through my bank's bill pay, scheduled for the 5th of every month. I logged in one Tuesday night and deleted them. It took 30 seconds. My mother noticed by the 15th. She texted, "Hey honey, I think the transfer might have not gone through. Can you check?" I read it. I put down my phone. I didn't respond. She texted again 2 days later, "Serena, is everything okay?" I put that one down too. The silence stretched. February. March. I started sleeping better. I started cooking again. I'd stopped somewhere in the fall without noticing, had been surviving on takeout and desk lunches. I started running in the mornings, just 20 minutes, just enough to feel like the day was mine before it belonged to the job. Theo asked me once, around February, whether I felt guilty. I thought about it honestly. I said, "I feel sad, but not guilty. There's a difference." He nodded. He understood the difference. I was grateful for that. In March, Caleb texted me. We hadn't spoken since the dinner, which told me everything I needed to know about how genuinely interested he'd been in the sibling relationship over the years. The text said, "Hey, I hear things have been weird between you and Mum and Dad. Just wanted to check in." I stared at it for a long time. I wrote back, "I'm doing well, thanks. I hope you are too." That was it. He didn't respond. April brought something I hadn't expected. My mother showed up at my apartment. I didn't know how she had the address. I'd moved in October, 2 months before the dinner, and I hadn't given it to them. I figured out later she had called my old landlord and he, not knowing any better, had told her where my mail was being forwarded. I opened the door and there she was. Smaller than I remembered somehow. She was holding a Tupperware container of something. Pot roast, I found out later, as if she'd driven 3 hours with a home-cooked meal as a peace offering. She said, "Can I come in?" I said, "No." That surprised her. I could see it on her face, the recalibration. I had never said no to her standing in a doorway before. She said, "Serena, I just want to talk." I said, "I know, but I'm not ready. When I'm ready, I'll call you." That's what my text said. It's been 4 months. I know how long it's been. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm your mother." And there it was, the sentence I had been waiting for my whole life and dreading my whole life. I'm your mother. As if that were a trump card. As if it explained and excused and required things all at once. I looked at her. I thought about everything I wanted to say. The math I'd done, the missed calls I'd let go to voicemail, the 32 years of being the capable one, the responsible one, the one who didn't need. I said, "I know you are, and I love you, but love isn't enough on its own. It has to come with something, respect maybe, or just attention, just being seen." I paused. "I'll call you when I'm ready. I promise that's true." She didn't argue. I think she saw something in my face that told her it wasn't worth arguing. She stood there for a moment with the Tupperware in her hands, and then she nodded, a small, tight nod, and she turned around and walked back down the hall toward the elevator. I watched until the elevator doors closed. Then I closed my own door. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. I wasn't sure what I felt. Not triumph. This wasn't a victory. Not grief exactly. Although there was something grief-adjacent in it, the particular sadness of wanting something from someone who doesn't have it to give. I put my hand flat on the counter. I looked around my apartment. The little one, 740 square feet, 3rd floor, south-facing windows that let in good light in the mornings. The running shoes by the door. The coffee maker Theo had given me for my birthday, nicer than I would have bought for myself. The framed photo on the wall that Lena had given me last Christmas. The 2 of us at 22 in Columbus, laughing at something I couldn't remember anymore, looking like people who had no idea what was coming. I was okay. I was more than okay. That's the part that took me the longest to understand, that okay was not the ceiling. that I had spent 32 years performing capability as a way to earn something that was just supposed to be given freely, and that exhausting performance had become so normal to me that I'd stopped noticing what it was costing. The energy it took, the quiet hum of never being enough, even when I was more than enough. I called my mother in June, not because I'd fully forgiven everything, but because I had done enough of my own work by then to have the conversation without disappearing into old patterns. We talked for an hour. It wasn't easy, she cried. I didn't. I said things I'd never said out loud before, not angrily, not as accusations, just as facts. I told her how it had felt to be 17 and pay for my own prom dress. I told her what it had been like to call with news and have the conversation rerouted to Caleb inside of 2 minutes. I told her I needed things to be different if we were going to have a relationship going forward. She listened. That was actually the surprising part. She listened more than she spoke, which wasn't something she had ever done before, or at least not that I could remember. At the end, she said she was sorry. She said she hadn't seen it the way I was describing it. She said she thought being hard on me was doing right by me. I said, I know you thought that. I believe she meant it. I also believe it was going to be a slow and imperfect and probably frustrating process, and that some things between us would never fully close. That's not resignation. That's just realism. I'm not interested in a fairy tale reconciliation. I'm interested in something honest. My dad called a few weeks after that. He didn't apologize, not exactly. He said he was proud of me, which I think was as close as he could get. I took it for what it was. Caleb got his real estate license in August. My mother texted me about it like she was announcing a moon landing. I texted back, that's great news. And I meant it. I really did. Because here is the thing I want to say to anyone who has ever been the capable one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need. Your capability was never the problem. It was never proof that you needed less. It was just proof that you were good at surviving. And surviving is not the same thing as being okay. And being okay is not the same thing as being full. I'm working on the full part. Last week, Theo and I went to dinner. Just us. No occasion. A Tuesday night because he'd found a new place that did a brown butter pasta that he'd heard was exceptional. We sat by the window. I ordered the pasta and a glass of wine, and I talked too much about a project at work, and he told me about a book he'd been reading, and at some point I looked at him across the table and thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not the absence of hard things, not a life without complications or family or history, just this. Being with someone who shows up. Being in a room where the question is never whether you belong in it. My promotion anniversary is next month. I'll probably take myself out to lunch. Maybe invite Lena if she's in town. I don't need a party, I just need to show up. And I always do. I've thought a lot about what it means to finally stop performing for people who aren't watching. That's what I was doing for most of my 20s. Performing capability, performing gratitude, performing the role of the daughter who didn't need anything so that everyone else could be comfortable. And the thing about that kind of performance is that it works. People believe it. They stop checking on you. They stop asking. And eventually they stop seeing you altogether because you've made yourself so self-sufficient, so frictionless, that there's nothing left to look at. What happened at that dinner? My dad sitting across from me, saying with a straight face that investing in me had somehow cost my brother his future. That wasn't a shock in the way you'd think. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was just the moment when the thing that had always been implied finally got said out loud. And once something is said out loud, you can't put it back. You can't unknow it. And I'm glad. I'm genuinely glad he said it, because I needed to hear it clearly, without any softness around the edges, to understand that I wasn't misreading the room. I had never been misreading the room. Here's what I believe now, having lived on the other side of that night. The way you treat people has consequences that accumulate quietly over years before they arrive all at once. My parents spent 3 decades teaching me that my role was to produce and not to need. and they were so consistent about it that I internalized it completely. I stopped asking for things. I stopped expecting acknowledgement. I stopped believing I was owed basic consideration. And that didn't protect me. It just made me easier to overlook. The consequence of that, for them, was not immediate. It never is. It came slowly, in deleted bank transfers and unanswered texts, and a door I held open just long enough to say what needed to be said and then gently, firmly closed. That's what I want people to understand who were in the middle of what I was in, not the dramatic version, not the shouting or the ultimatums or the burning it all down. The quiet version. The version where you just stop. Stop absorbing. Stop explaining. Stop making yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. That stopping is not cruelty. It's the most honest thing you can do for yourself and honestly for them too, because it forces a reckoning that years of accommodation never would. Lena told me once, a few months after the dinner, that she had watched me shrink every time I talked about my family for years. She said she never knew how to say it. I told her she didn't have to. I had to see it myself. The work I've done since that night hasn't been about anger. Anger was there, but it burned off quickly. What replaced it was something steadier, a commitment to building a life that actually fit me. Theo, and the Tuesday pasta dinners and the morning runs and the work that I'm proud of, that's not a consolation prize. That's the thing itself. That's what I was working toward all along, even when I didn't know it. Serena, I keep wanting to say to myself, like I'm talking to someone younger, someone still standing in the grocery store parking lot counting tips. You were never the problem. You were always the answer. You just needed to stop answering for the wrong people.